Okay guys, welcome back. So yesterday we were learning about number tricks and how we can pick a number and then we can do all these operations to it and then we end up getting some sort of trick. Like we end up getting the number that we started with, or we end up getting that everybody in the room gets the same number. Well, most expressions don't actually give us number tricks. In fact, oftentimes you have an expression, you get an answer, there's only one number that somebody could have picked. And so that's where we're going to head today. So if you take a look at the expression that's here, this is actually not a number trick. If I ask you to pick a number, if everybody in the room picks a number, then we will all get a different answer. So with me here today, I have my husband to help us out. I have Mr. Bennett Logic Rocket. How you doing, Mr. Rocket?
Awesome!
All right. So if you take a look at what we have here, we have this expression, and we have an order of operations. So if we start with x, what's the first thing I'm going to have him do to x? I'm going to have him multiply by 2. And after he multiplies by 2, he's going to subtract 6. I'm just following the order of operations here, and then he's going to divide 2 by 2, and then he's going to get 8. So, Mr. Rocket, can you pick a number?
Yep.
Don't tell me what it is.
Pi.
Multiply it by 2. It can't be pi. Pick an integer.
Okay.
Multiply it by 2.
Yep.
Subtract 6.
Yep.
Divide by 2.
Yep.
And add 8.
Yep.
What did you get?
7.
7. So he did all that and he got 7. So basically what we've just created is his equation. 2x minus 6 over 2 plus 8 equals 7. What we're going to do is we're going to predict what number he picked. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by taking his 7 and we're going to follow this arrow all the way down and we're going to put the 7 right down here. Then we're going to undo the operations. So the last thing that I asked Mr. Rocket to do is to add 8. So we're going to undo the fact that he added 8. We're going to subtract 8 and we're going to put this here at the bottom. And then we're going to follow these arrows. So I'm going to take his 7, I'm going to subtract 8. 7 minus 8 is -1. So I'm going to put this here. Then I'm going to take -1 and I'm going to do the opposite of what we had here. What did we have there? We had divide by 2. The opposite of divide by 2 is multiply by 2. So here we're going to multiply by 2. And so I'm just going to follow the arrow. I'm going to take -1, I'm going to multiply it by 2, and I'm going to get -2. Over here, the next step, I subtracted 6, so now I'm going to add 6 because that's the opposite. I'm going to take that -2, I'm going to add 6, and when I add 6, I get 4. And then I'm going to do the opposite of multiply by 2. I'm going to divide by 2. And 4 divided by 2 gives me 2. Mr. Rocket, was that the number that you picked?
Yep.
Awesome. All right, so this next problem here, on this column right here, we are going to write the operations that we are doing with x. So if we start with x, Mr. Rocket, what's the next thing I'm going to do after I start with x?
You're going to subtract 4 from x.
I'm going to subtract 4. After I subtract 4, what is the next step?
You're going to multiply that by 3.
I'm going to multiply that by 3, and then what?
And then you're going to add 6.
Nope.
5.
There you go. Add 5. All right, so now we're going to do our undo operations over here. I'll start at the bottom. The opposite of adding 5 is to
subtract 5.
Subtract 5, and the opposite of multiplying by 3 is to?
Is to take the cubic root of it.
Nope. Divide by 3.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yep. And then I'm going to, the opposite of subtracting 4 is to?
Multiply by 4.
Nope, try again. Add 4, right?
4.
So, what I'm going to do now is I'm now going to ask you to do that. So, pick a number, don't tell me what it is.
7.
Try again.
Got it.
Okay. I want you to take that number, I want you to subtract 4.
Yep.
Multiply by 3.
Mm-hmm.
Add 5.
Mm-hmm.
And what's your result?
5.
5. All right, so I'm going to take that 5 and I'm going to follow the arrow and I'm going to put it right here. So that was my end result was 5 and I'm going to work backwards. I'm going to do 5 minus 5 and 5 minus 5 gives us 0.
25.
Nope. 0.
0.
0 divided by 3 gives me 0.
Also 0.
And then 0 plus 4 gives me 4. is for the number that you started with.
It sure is.
All right, so what we've actually just done here is we have solved an equation. We have solved this equation where x is equal to 4. So for this next one, what I actually want you to do is I actually want you to write down your operations on x, and I want you to write your undo operations. Do that right now. Stop the video, do it. Okay, we are back again. Take a look at my operations on x. Make sure you have those correct. My undo operations are right here. So, Mr. Rocket, pick a number. Don't tell me what it is. I want you to add 3 to that number.
Yep.
Multiply by 2.
Yep.
Multiply by -2.
Oh, that'll be better.
Add 18 and divide by 6.
Okay.
And what was your result?
-1/3.
-1/3. Excellent. All right, so now we're going to take that -1/3. We're going to put it at the bottom. Nope, I put it in the wrong spot. We are going to erase where I put that -1/3. We're going to take that -1/3. We're going to put it in the first little box right here. And then I'm going to take that -1/3. I'm going to put it down at the bottom. And now we're going to go through and we're going to do the math. So -1/3 times 6. You guys can do this. This is just 6/1 times -1/3, which gives us -6/3, which is -2. And then I'm going to do -2 minus 18, which is -20. And then I'm going to do -20 divided by -2, which is
10.
10. And then 10 minus 3, which is
70.
7. Was 7 the number that you picked?
It sure was.
Awesome. So we solved this equation and we got that x is equal to 7. All right, so let's move on to the next one, or -11. All right, so this next one, a little bit different because if you notice I have an x squared here. So again, thinking about our order of operations, if I start with x, the first thing I have to do with it is square it. So my operations on x is I'm going to first start by squaring it. All right, and then we're going to add 3, and then we're going to multiply by -2. So now, real fast, let's talk about our undo operations, right? So we already know the opposite of multiplying by -2 is to divide by -2. So we're going to do that. Then we're going to subtract 3. But now, think about it. What's the opposite of squaring something, Mr. Rocket?
It's the square root.
Awesome. So the opposite, so we're going to have to find the square root of something in this. Okay, so Mr. Rocket, after you, did you pick your number?
I did.
All right, and you squared it, you added 3, and you multiplied by -2.
I did.
And what did you end up with?
-24.
Okay, so he got -24. So we're going to put that in the circle, and then we're going to bring down the -24 down here. And now let's undo these operations. So the first thing I do is divide by -2, which is going to bring me to positive 12. And then I am going to subtract 3, which is going to bring me to 9. Then we're going to find the square root of 9, which is 3. Did you pick 3?
No, I didn't.
What number did you pick?
-3.
Oh, well, why do you think that happened?
Well, it's the square root.
Okay, so when we find the square root of 9, technically this is not something we've really talked about yet, but if you think about it, the square root of 9 could be 3 or -3, right? Because if I go back and I think about squaring something, right? So remember, if I were to put 3 in for x squared, well, 3 squared is 9, but -3 squared is also 9. So with this particular problem, because we had to square x, and then at the end we had to find the square root, we have to think about the fact that there could be 2 possible answers. So the answer to this question would be plus or minus 3. And you've never seen this notation before, but anytime you find the square root of something when you're solving for x, there's always going to be 2 solutions. It could be the positive answer or the negative answer, and we couldn't actually predict which one Mr. Rocket picked here. All right, let's move on to the next one. Well, darn it. All right, so this particular problem, again, notice that the first thing that we have to do is square x. The last one and this one, these equations are called quadratic equations, and they're called quadratic equations because we have a squared variable in it. And we'll talk more about that later. But the first group that we did where we weren't squaring it, those are called linear equations. And we'll get to that. We'll talk about that a lot more later, but I thought I would mention it here. So looking now, first thing I'm going to do with x is I have to square it. And then I'm going to add 13. And then I'm going to divide by 2. So let's go ahead and write our undo operations. We're going to multiply them by 2. We're going to subtract 13. And the opposite of squaring something is to find the square root of it. Okay, Mr. Rocket, did you pick your number?
I did.
All right. And when you squared it, added 13 and divided by 2, what did you get?
67.
All right. So you got 67. So that 67 is going to go down here. And then we're going to do 67 times 2, which brings me to 134. And then we're going to subtract 13, which brings us to 121. And then we have to keep in mind we're now finding the square root of 121, which our brains are immediately going to go, it's 11. But it could be what?
Positive or negative 11?
Yes. So we are not actually sure which one he picked. Do you want to tell us which one you picked?
I picked positive 11.
All right. So in this case, he did pick positive 11, but there's no way for us to know. So whenever you're solving a quadratic equation, if you end up having to find the square root, which you will when you're solving, you have to keep in mind that there are 2 answers, positive or negative 11. All right, move on. All right, so I want you to try the next 3 completely on your own. Notice that the equations are already equal to something, so there's no reason to ask anybody what they picked for x because we know that it equals, the whole thing equals 10. So you are going to put the 10 down here at the bottom. This setup is a little bit different. You do the same thing. The first column, you put your operations on x here, and that goes, the order of operation goes that way. And then you put your undo operations and you work up. So the second column is where you put your undo operations, and then you work your way up. So go ahead and stop the video and give it a try, and then tune back in to see if you have the right answer. All right, and so the correct answer for this one is 23. So look at, these were my undo operations. I worked my way up to get 23. If you want it to double check to make sure you were correct, then you put the 23 back into the problem for x, and you follow these steps, and you should end up with 10. Go ahead and pause the video and try this next one again on your own. All right, and so here's your answer for this one. You should have gotten that x is equal to negative 2. Now, go ahead and move on to the next one. And so for this one, you should have gotten positive or negative 5, or both of them, plus or minus 5. Quick reminder, whenever you have an x squared, there are 2 numbers I could have put in for x to end up getting 103, and they just so in this case happen to be positive 5 and negative 5, right? So whenever your first step is to square the number, you have to keep in mind that when you square a positive, you get a positive. When you square a negative, you get a positive. So the very last step, the opposite of squaring something, is finding the square root. So you've got to remember that when you find the square root, there's actually 2 numbers, right? There are actually 2 numbers that if I square it, that will give me positive 25. It's plus or minus 5. All right, so that's it for today. Thank you, Mr. Rocket, for joining us.
Thank you, Mrs. Rocket.
I'm sorry that I didn't let you pick pi or I or negative I or
Negative
E.
I. Negative I would have been really fun.
It would have been really fun, but I'm afraid that we don't quite have the knowledge for that just yet.
Okay.
We'll get there someday. All right. See you
I know they
later.
will.
Bye.